Welcome to another On the Blue Line podcast. I am your host, Wayne Mulder, and I'm happy to be back with you again this week. And this is another interview room where I get to sit down with a guest from a different walk of life and tell you a little bit about their story. And I am sure you're going to love the guest this week. I know I was just thinking about it. Seems like every time I tell you there's another fabulous guest, an amazing guest, it almost sounds hyperbolic, but I am telling you, I have been privileged to sit down with some of the neatest people and have some of the neatest conversations, and then to get to deliver those to you each and every week. It's just really an amazing opportunity. So I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're checking out the other podcast, Morning Roll Call. In that one, it comes out on Mondays typically. That's just you and I sitting down and having a few minutes together to discuss whatever the news is of the day and to discuss maybe a few actionable things that we can do about it. If you haven't seen the ebook that I put out, How the Law Enforcement Career Makes You Cynical, and of course, more importantly, what you can do about it, then please be sure to check that out. It is available only on Amazon Kindle, and the links to that is on the website at ontheblueline.com. So without taking any more time, I want to tell you about this week's guest, Jasmin Peach, coming to us from the other side of the world, straight from Australia. She joined law enforcement at the age of 19, very young, when she went through the academy, and she found that this was her dream job. She loved it. She was fortunate to work on a great squad. She really loved what she got to do, and then things changed. She ended up on a different squad, and then things really changed, and a very tragic and unfortunate incident happened to her. And then the good news is that even when bad things happen, good things come out of it. So she speaks about her experience with mental health, dysfunctional coping mechanisms, dealing with organizational disappointment, and eventually leaving the job that she thought was going to be her forever. However, what I really love is that her goal in life is to help people who are in the position that she was once in, because she wants to be the person that she needed. Tell me that's not a pretty cool mission. So without taking any more time, here's this week's guest on the Blue Line with Jasmin Peach. Well, Jasmin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, this is a blast. I am so glad we were able to connect, and I think we're going to have a good time talking today.
Yeah, absolutely.
You had said you had listened to some of the other shows, so as you know, I have to do my get to know you questions. As I've said with previous guests, I threw them out once and then people complained, so now they're back. So
That's funny.
We'll start with the hard one: coffee or tea?
Coffee. Yeah, absolutely. 100% shift worker. I relied on coffee. Yeah.
Very good.
And tea's just like hot flavor. It's not for me. Yeah.
Well, and I ask this question all the time. I mean, sometimes I do like tea, but everybody knows I am a strong coffee advocate as well. So
yeah. No, tea's not for me. It doesn't do anything. So definitely coffee, the stimulus. I need that to get through the days.
You and me both.
Yeah.
Any particular place you like to have that cup of coffee?
Oh, that's a hard one. Where I live, there's a few coffee shops nearby. So yeah, generally it's just I'll go for a walk and find my local place, or when I was in the police force, a night shift, it'd be McDonald's because it's the only place open. So you take what you can get.
Oh yes, many a gas station I became a regular at. I understand completely.
Yeah. And then COVID hit and we couldn't even get coffee from anywhere because they were all closed. So that was a hard time.
I'm sure. And I can imagine in Australia, because you're, just so the listeners know, you're in Australia currently. And yeah, that would be a different experience. So I live in Florida. So my experience during COVID was a lot different than what other people have had to go through. But yeah, I can imagine how difficult that was.
Yeah. Everything was locked down and nothing was open and we weren't allowed anywhere and no coffee and people running wild because they were sick of it. It was, staying awake was hard.
I'm sure it was. Well, let me ask you, do you have a best or worst travel story?
Yes, I do. So I was, when on night shift in Australia, or in my station, we have 5 days off before we start night shift. And I think the point of that is to prepare yourself, like your sleeping pattern, all that kind of stuff. But my thought process was, why not have a good time in those 5 days? So from Australia, Bali is a very close flight. So I used to, on my days off, get my passport, a group of friends, if I could, if not, go by myself, and travel over to Bali for 5 or 4 nights. And then I'd catch the overnight flight back to Australia. I wouldn't sleep at all on the plane because it was so uncomfortable. And then I'd sleep the whole day before I started night shift. So it was a really good way to transition into night shift. But one time I turned up to the airport and I gave them my passport, and then they escorted me off into this room. I'm like, oh, what's happening? Because all the fancy technology with passports, you know, usually you go straight through. And they've gone, this passport is lost. This isn't yours. And I was like, what do you mean? And so anyway, a few years prior, I'd actually reported one of my passports lost because I couldn't find it, got a new passport. And I moved a lot, lots of boxes, lots of packing. And so then in the interim, I found this passport, thought it's my current one, and gone to the airport with this lost passport. So now I'm in a room with, you know, all of our Australian federal police, and they're like interrogating me. Like, and I'm like, I can't have this, you know, I'm a police officer, I can't have this. So anyway, a few phone calls. I had my boyfriend come and drop my actual passport down, and we're able to resolve it pretty quickly. But yeah, that was a bit of a nightmare because I had no idea why I was in this interrogation room with our federal police. It was, yeah.
Right. I could just imagine that would not be something I would want to go through.
No. But I got to Bali and I had a great time, and, you know, got my overnight flight back and started night shift. So it all worked out in the end.
Perfect. So the rest of the vacation was wonderful.
Yes, it was.
Perfect. So and maybe it's Bali, but where is that place that brings you the most peace? Like that one spot where you can just kind of stop and breathe and enjoy life?
So it's anywhere near the beach. So I live on the beach at the moment and I love that. And most of the places that I visit will be around near a beach, or, you know, just walking along the sand and having the sound of the ocean rolling in and the sand in your feet. It's a lot of serenity, and I don't think you can get that anywhere else, or not for me anyway. So
I agree. Now, are you a surfer or anything, or you just enjoy the ambiance of being around the beach?
I wouldn't call myself a surfer. I try.
I know the feeling.
But I get wiped out more than I actually stand up. So, you know, take that with a grain of salt, I guess.
It counts.
Yeah.
I'm going to say it counts because it's my story. So I'm with you.
Yeah. All right. Yes, I am a surfer. Yes.
I love it. Well, thank you, Jasmin. So let's go kind of into your origin story. You were quite young when you came to law enforcement. So what kind of led you to wanting to go into law enforcement, and what's kind of your backstory?
Yeah, so I finished high school, and like a typical person or that finishes high school, I was directionless. I had no idea where I wanted to go. All I knew is that I didn't want to go to uni or college, as it is in America, and get some sort of debt, because I was going to go into a course that I didn't really know what I wanted to do anyway. And I had a really good friend of mine who had been in the police force for years. And he used to sit me down and talk to me, and he'd tell me all these really cool stories. You know, he'd go, oh, the other night we got into this car chase and this guy started jumping fences and I was after him. And then I'll tell you the rest when you become a cop. And it always just got me. I was like, I just want to know the end of this story every time. It'd get to the punchline and he'd never tell me. So anyway, I went to a recruiting seminar and then, ended up joining at the ripe age of 19. So, wow. I was like the token young person. I don't know how it works in America. We have the academy. So in my course, we had 2 young people, so me and another girl, and did my 12 months there. And then I graduated to the nightclub strip of South Australia. So kind of like, it wouldn't be like Las Vegas because that's big.
It's Vegas, right?
It's the relative to that, and probably a lot smaller, but still a lot of people that are induced with alcohol, drugs, fights, vomit everywhere. Yeah, that kind of scene.
All the fun stuff that comes with all the crazy partying.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
So your academy is 12 months then? Is that full time? Essentially 40 hours a week plus or minus, or?
Yes. So when I went through it was 12 months, full time. You get paid to study, which I thought was awesome, because if I hated it, then I was like, well, I'm not at a loss.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. So you do that, but I think now it's 9 months. So it chops and changes all the time. I'm not really sure why, but mine was 12 months in the academy, and then you do 18 months of probation, which is just like you have someone there kind of guiding you while you're out on the road doing your thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
That entire 18 months you have someone with you, kind of like a field training officer?
Yeah, we call them a field tutor, but field training officer would be the same. Yes.
Okay.
So for the first 6 months, you work pretty intensely with them. So they're guiding you through everything. And then after that, you are left to your own devices, but they're still monitoring you. So you can go out on your own. You can go out with people that aren't field tutors and do your own thing, but they're still keeping quite a close eye on you to make sure that you're doing everything right and, policies, all that kind of stuff.
Interesting. Yeah, it's very similar here. The academy when I went through was 770 hours, and I went to a night academy. So it was essentially 9 months, but it was 9 months, quote unquote, part-time. So I worked full-time during the day, and then I went to the academy at night and weekends.
Wow,
And
that's
so, yeah, so that was, and I didn't get paid. So some of that's changed. America, it's all, the jurisdictions are split up. Like there's not a million, but there's a lot of different jurisdictions here, and someone's experience can be completely different depending on where they live. So some agencies, they hire you first and then they put you through training and stuff. In the area I'm in at that time, you pretty much, it was at a community college and you decided you want to be in the program. So you paid out pocket to go to the program in the hopes that when you got done, you might secure employment. So a little bit different in that regard.
Yeah, that's massively different.
But very cool. So this agency that you work for, how does that, so was it like a city type agency or a county type agency? I have no idea how Australia is split up when it comes to those kind of things.
Yeah, sure. So in Australia, we have our different states. And so I was based in South Australia. So we don't have, I guess, your counties. We have our regional towns, which would be very similar to counties. But your whole state is responsible for those regional towns as well. So you go through your training in the city, and then once you finish your training, you elect where you want to go. It doesn't mean that you're going to get where you want to go, because when you start up, you sign a form that says you can send me anywhere.
Okay.
And then depending on where they need police, they will send police there. So like I said, I went to the nightclub strip, which is actually where I wanted to go, but I had people from my course that were sent to those regional towns as well. So like the counties, but all trained in that one in the city and then sent out.
Okay. So you get to the nightclub strip, you're loving it. You finally get to find out what happens after you chase and jump over the fence. So
yes.
Tell us a little bit about that time. So you're enjoying this period of your time in law enforcement, correct?
Yeah, so I was so lucky. I landed on a team that was just amazing, and a team full of guys. So they were very protective of me as well. I was like the little sister to them, which was a lot of fun. But you land on this nightclub strip, and it's just, you feel like you're thrown into the deep end of a swimming pool, and you've just got to like tread water, because otherwise you're not going to survive. So, there's fights happening everywhere. And you just, because drunk people can't control themselves. And I remember the first fight that I actually saw, my field tutor didn't see it. So I've like tapped him on the shoulder. I'm like, there's one going on over there. And he's like, oh, he was dealing with someone. So he's kind of like palmed me off. And I was like, all right, here we go. So I've just like run into this middle of this fight, no idea what I'm going to do. And I've just like put my hands out like, stop. And luckily,
they actually listened.
Yeah, they did. Luckily, they did. It could have turned really bad. And afterwards, my field tutor was like, it was really good. I'm glad that you're brave and you're strong and you ran into that. He was like, but remember, we've got spray. You could have pulled your spray out and been like, hey guys, stop, or I'm going to spray you, not just run in and hoped. And I was, that's a good point. So it was so much fun, and you see things that you never ever think you would see. And because it's the city as well, there's people, I don't know what it's like in America, but in the city there's a fair few homeless people. And I think the difference maybe from Australia to America is our homeless people, a lot of them have homes. They actually prefer to live on the streets because that's where they'll get their methamphetamines, that's where they'll get their drugs, their alcohol. They can beg for money. So some of them are genuinely homeless, but a lot of them are not.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I remember when I first learned that, because I was like, oh, they're homeless. They're not homeless. So, but very interesting to kind of have the interactions with them. And I don't know what it's like in America, but there's this meth strength that they get when they're on these amphetamines. So, they're in a fight. And so you go in to break up this fight, and there's a female the size of, 5 foot and 40 kilos. And it's taking 4 of us to hold her down because somehow she's just got this strength from whatever illicit substance she is on. And I remember just seeing that, and it's like that side of things is so incredible that you don't even understand that that's what it's doing to them. But then also on the other side of that, you see people that are also on drugs, they'll just smear their poo everywhere, like all over buildings. And just things you never thought humans would ever do. Before joining, I was like, why would you do that? That's disgusting.
Yeah.
And maybe a 3-year-old would do it because it's hilarious, but not a fully grown person. So it really, really opened up my eyes to what the world was really like, I think, and especially with, people that are less fortunate and how, they can help themselves, but a lot of them don't.
Yes. Yeah, no, we definitely have a homeless crisis here as well, and in different parts of the country. You hear it a lot in different states, but certainly it's here as well. I don't think there's any part of America that's untouched from people experiencing homelessness, but there is definitely a lot of resources that are coming. And a lot of times the homelessness does come down to a choice or addiction. And I'm not going to get into that, but whether, depending on why you make that determination as to the cause, a lot of times they are truly experiencing homelessness. They don't have another house, even if it is a illicit substance kind of situation, as you were describing. But you're absolutely right. Now in Australia, do you guys also work all the death investigations that occur? So here in the state that I'm in, for instance, if anyone passes away outside of a hospital or hospice, and hospice is like a end of life care. So anyone that's not in a hospital or like a nursing home, if you would, then we as law enforcement go and take care of that. Did you guys do the same there in Australia?
Yeah, we are the exact same. So we have to go and then determine whether the death is suspicious or not.
Right.
So then if it's not suspicious, then we deal with it. And then if it is, then you call the detectives down and you palm it off to them.
Yes. Well, that was one of the most eye-opening things to me, because I grew up, I was very fortunate, didn't have or know a lot of people who had passed away. And then coming into this career where you just dealt with so much on top of the things that you were describing, but then also to deal with so much death, it was really eye-opening for me personally.
Yeah, it is. It's you don't realize how many people daily actually pass away, and whether that's of old age or, we had a lot in the city that was the overdose, or unfortunately, because there's lots of tall buildings in the city, you have the people that jump off as well. So it's just it is eye-opening because they don't share that stuff in the media.
Yeah. No, people have no idea. And then of course they have no idea how it affects us, but we'll get to that here in a little bit. So you're loving life, you're in this position, and then something happens at some point and you get moved to another location. Is that correct?
That's correct. So I was on a team. So my first team I graduated to were amazing and I loved them. And then our South Australia decided to do this massive restructure. And so everyone got thrown up in the air and you got put on a new team. And so I landed.
Sounds like government. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. So it doesn't change much from different countries by the sound of it. I landed on a team with a supervisor who took a liking to me. And so there's a culture around drinking in South Australian police, I think in Australian police, and I don't know whether it's in America. It's not, I don't particularly like the culture because I think it's a very dysfunctional way to cope with trauma and what you're going through. However, as a 19-year-old, I grew up in this organization. I didn't know any different. So we've started this new team and the supervisor's gone, we should all, come have drinks at mine. So everyone's, yep, that sounds good. We'll get to know each other.
in Australia, you can drink at 19. I just want to, is that correct? You can drink at
Yes,
18, correct, in
you
Australia?
can drink at 18.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it's 21 in US. That's why I want to make that clear for my listeners. But anyway, go on.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I wasn't a cop and then drinking underage. That would have been, could you imagine? Yes. So 18, you're allowed to drink. And so we've gone to my supervisor's place and everyone's drinking, and he's throughout the night just doing little things that weren't super comfortable. So, you know, there'd be people dancing and he'd come over and like pull me in close to him, to the point of where I had a good friend who came over to me and said, you know, Jazz, you're like a little sister to me. I'm not going to let anything bad happen to you. And I've gone, oh crap, other people are noticing. You know, it's not just me feeling uncomfortable, it's other people noticing that something's happening. So it got later on into the night, and because everyone had been drinking, the supervisor had offered for people to stay the night at his. So most of the team were staying. So I've gone into the bedroom that I've been allocated, and my supervisor has closely followed, and he has grabbed my arms and pinned me down on the bed. And it's one of those situations, I think everyone kind of knows when time draws out. So you don't actually know how long, I have no idea how long I was there, because it could have been 5 seconds, it could have been 30 seconds, but it just felt like it went forever. For me, it could have been hours, you know? And so he's got me pinned down. I'm trying to move and I'm trying to, you know, get my voice out there so someone can hear me. Luckily, I say luckily as a kind of off the cuff comment, but my friend who had earlier in the night, you know, been watching and being concerned, followed in. Probably, again, time was stretched out, maybe a minute after, and he's seen that, you know, my supervisor has me pinned down by my arms over this bed and straddled over me. And so he said he just saw red and he grabbed my supervisor and just threw him up against the wall. And so from there, I just ran out. And so I don't know what happened after that. I don't know what happened between the two of them. I kind of, for a long period of time, that actual incident was kind of blacked out in my mind. It took a while for me to find it in my mind and discover it again and what had happened. And a lot of it tracing back is the fear of the unknown. So, you know, if my friend hadn't have been looking out for me, you know, he's a very good friend of mine and I appreciate him so much. But what would have happened if he wasn't there, or if it had been a minute later? You know, I couldn't move. This guy was a lot bigger than me. And also putting my trust in this person. You know, he is my supervisor at the end of the day. He's the person I'm supposed to report to, I'm supposed to learn from. And he's in a position of power over me. And he's gone and done this. So it was a long set of like betrayal, losing trust. I went through the whole, I lost trust in men in the organization, which was really sad because, you know, I graduated to this team where I only had men around me and I loved them. And so then I'm going into this space of, but I trusted my supervisor. So who else have I trusted who might do this to me?
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
no, powerful. So in those days after, I think it becomes kind of part of your story, but in the days after this incident, this kind of becomes the catalyst for a lot of difficult things that then start to go on in your life. Is that correct?
yeah, that's correct. So in the days after, we have a reporting process here. So I didn't feel super comfortable reporting it because it's a crap reporting program that we have. And so anyway, I reported it and said, I don't want to work for him anymore, which as you can imagine is fair enough. So then they've said to me, all right, we can move you out to the suburbs, which in that situation, it shouldn't have been me that got moved. You know, my whole support network and everyone that I knew was at this station on the nightclub strip.
Right.
But I got moved and it was a blessing in disguise because I got to experience a whole nother side of policing that I wouldn't have experienced without this move. And yeah, but it kind of led into COVID hit. So when COVID hit, I was able to run away because I don't know what it was like in America, but in Australia, our states, you know, we're one country, but our states felt like they became little countries. So we had people on the border stopping other states from entering our state.
Wow. We didn't quite
Yeah,
get there yet here, but they tried. But anyway.
yeah, it was really like, I look back on it, I'm like, oh, that's horrible. So they needed extra police to go down and man the border. And so instead of, facing what I needed to do and, giving a statement and doing all of that reporting side of things, I just kept running away to the border.
Okay.
And so then when I was on the border, there's a pub there. What do cops do when there's a pub? They drink. So I went to the pub so often and I was drinking so often. And it's only on reflection where I think about it and I go, before that, I didn't drink very much at all.
Okay.
I'd occasionally at a work event, I'd have some drinks, but I was never one to go out and get drunk or, black out as you would. And on these border stints, that was the first time I ever blacked out from drinking. So yeah, that kind of flowed into, in hindsight, seeing it as a dysfunctional coping mechanism. My partner at the time as well, I don't think it's very well spoken about, but I was not faithful to him. And that came from just wanting attention wherever I could get it.
Yeah.
And I talk about it a little bit in my own podcast that I have, where it's, it's not something I'm proud of. It's something I feel very guilty about, but it's still something that happens, and it happens a lot in the Australian police force. Again, I can't speak for America, but the saying is, join the force, get a divorce.
Yeah.
So it's a culture around, it's almost promoting cheating, which is something that I don't love. And it's something that I did do, but it's something that needs to be spoken about, because that, on top of a lot of other things like drinking, and I did excessive exercise so that I could feel physical pain over emotional pain. Among all those things, it's something that you need to deal with and you do need to talk about. Even though it is shameful, it's something that you need to address.
Right.
So that was the lead on of all those decisions. But then from there, I finally went back to proper policing, not border policing, and, found my mojo, got back into it, became a domestic violence investigator, which was really cool. I had a close friend of mine that went through a pretty horrific domestic violence relationship. So I felt almost responsible to do that. Yeah. In my own kind of personal way, and just to be able to help victims that bit more. And all while in the process of reporting, which took a very long time. And by the end of the reporting process, I'd come to the decision that my organisation and their values, not their corporate values, the ones that they tell everyone, their actual values, and my values didn't align, because, they didn't protect me, and they didn't look after me, and they didn't do the things that they were supposed to do for me in that time. And so I decided that once there was a penalty, I was going to leave the police force and then advocate for, mental health and actually reaching out when you need help, because it is such a stigma in the police force that you don't talk about traumatic events.
Yeah. Oh, it's absolutely true. And a lot of the things you're describing are just as much an issue here, maybe a little different, just because America is America, and it's different. Very diverse, very large country, and you can't paint America with a broad brush, because the experiences of someone living in the county I live in, the state I live in the section of the country I live in, is going to be completely different than someone in a county, say in Washington or something like that on the other side of the United States. But that being said, a lot of things you said really resonated with me. When I first went through the academy, a lot of these sergeants who had been on patrol for a long time, in fact, I refer to it in a little book that I had written, How the Law Enforcement Career Makes You Cynical. And I talk about how I had some of these, these old crusty sergeants that were like, you're going to be divorced within 10 years, you're going to be, and it was all these assumptions that there was no other way around it. It was just going to happen by you coming into this career. It was just a foregone conclusion, which is obviously not true, and it doesn't have to be that way. And that's part of what I love about your story, is how you recognize not only the culture issues that we have, but that it doesn't have to be that way. Let's
Mm.
talk a little bit about the failure of the agency or the organization, as you put it. So, did you get any kind of support from them at all after those days, or was there anything they did right? And if not, what should have happened?
Yeah, so you see me smiling through that
Yes,
because if you don't smile, you cry. So
I'm
um,
with you. I smile a lot.
so yeah, what happened is I reported it and I got moved, obviously. And so once you report something, what is supposed to happen is you get referred to our employee assistance section. So in that section, we have social workers, counselors, and police officers. And so one of them is supposed to contact you and say, hey, we heard this happened because you got referred to us. Do you need any resources? Do you want an appointment with one of us? Or do you want us to refer you somewhere? So that's what's supposed to happen. That did not happen to me. So I didn't get referred to them at all. And
Why not?
so
I mean, not to cut you off there, but why do you think it didn't happen? Do you think it was just as simple as, I mean, is there a non nefarious reason why it happened? Is it just one of these things where they accidentally, you fell through the cracks, if you would?
it could be any of those.
Okay.
I am not very happy with how everything went down.
Understood.
And so the person that I actually had to report my incident to, because of the hierarchy structure that we have, he was well known for sexual harassment towards females. So I was already uncomfortable in that situation. So I don't know whether he forgot or
Gotcha.
whether he chose not to, because he was also good friends with my supervisor. So it's just one of those things where that was what he was supposed to do and he didn't. But because he didn't do that, the next step up, like the boss above him, is supposed to read over everything and they're supposed to check that things have happened. So it's not just a case of me slipping through the cracks once. It happened on 4 levels where I slipped through the cracks, apparently. So that's kind of where I drew the conclusion that it was not slipping through the cracks. It was just they neglected to do what they're supposed to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, from there I moved out to the suburbs and I was on a roster line that still lined up with him. So the suburb that I moved to was very close to the city, and because of how busy the nightclub strip gets, we still get called in a fair bit to help. So we get pulled in just to help out when there's a big fight or, you know, there's knives, whatever it may be. So I was still on, you know, a weekly basis seeing this man, which,
Wow.
yeah, which shouldn't be happening. And so then it got to the point where so the city and my suburb were on the same radio channel. So I would hear his voice all the time as well because he's on my radio channel. So there were some shifts where I would say to my partner when I was working with a partner, I'm not listening to the radio. Let me know what's going on, which is really dangerous as well. And I can
Right.
recognize.
But still completely understood, because here you are having to relive. I mean, when we talk about traumas and we talk about these kind of things, and we'll get to the training and so forth that you went through, but I mean, this is exactly like you're going to have to relive this event that you went through every night listening to this guy's voice on the radio, which should be completely preventable. Just out of curiosity, can you give us some idea how big of an agency or organization, I guess is the term you keep using, that we're looking at? So like how many officers are typically out at a night? Or, I mean, are we talking hundreds? Are we talking 10, 20?
Yeah, so in the city, there would be probably between 50 and 70 in the city. But in the suburb that I worked in on a night, there would just be my team, and that would be 8 people.
Okay. All right. So about a squad. And then in the city, that's comparable to a medium-sized agency around here. So, okay.
Yes. Yeah. So they lined up with us on the roster. So every shift that I worked, he was working, unless one of us was sick or on leave, you know. So I think it took about 6 months and I finally, excuse my language, cracked the shits, as we say in Australia.
I've never heard that term, but okay.
I just got fed up and I was like, I cannot deal with this anymore. And I'd done a lot for the agency. You know, I was very much a yes man. I would do what they wanted. I'd do the overtime. I'd do the roadside breath stuff, you know. And it got to the point where I just said, I can't do this anymore. So I went to my supervisor at the time and said, look, I cannot keep running into him. I don't know whether at that point in time, I said, you can move me. Even though that shouldn't be the case, I got to the point where I just said, you can move me because I don't want to deal with it anymore. So that went up the chain and then came back down to me and they said, all right, we're going to move him to the cells. Again, I don't know how it works in America, but our cells, for each area, we have a cell complex where we take prisoners, whoever gets arrested. And I said, oh, that's really cool that he's moving to the cells. Is he on the same roster line? Yes, he is. I was like, awesome. I'm not going to arrest anyone.
Right.
Like,
no matter what, you're still running into this guy.
Right. You're now preventing me from actually doing my job properly. You know, with him in the city, it was unpleasant and it was triggering. And, you know, I was turning my radio down, but I would still go and I would do my job. And if someone needed to be arrested, they'd be arrested or whatever it was. I'm like, but now I'm not even going to arrest people because I know that that's where I'm going to run into him. So after I said that and, you know, said, this is stressful, you're triggering me, the trauma, they finally moved him roster lines. So then it was like, thank God, because I couldn't deal with running into him anymore. So I don't know why it took that long. And for me, finally speaking out to move him somewhere else. Because when I think about it, it's common sense.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I don't know, even while they were looking into it, you know, the investigation or whatever part to just separate you, just like you said, just makes sense. Like, I don't understand why we wouldn't go there automatically, but okay. So let's go down. What are some of the lessons that you learned? Maybe more specifically, obviously, you learned some lessons that we could talk about on how we're properly organizations should operate. But when it comes to the mental health and kind of the dysfunctional coping mechanisms or self-sabotaging behaviors, what are some of the lessons that you kind of learned through that process?
Yeah, so because I've done a lot of reading on it now as well, and research of my own and courses of my own, just to learn more. And I think it starts at the base of our recruits, you know, where I feel there's a neglect going through the academy of, we teach our recruits how to arrest people and we teach them legislation and laws and policies, but we don't actually teach them how to look after themselves. We don't teach them, you know, how to do breath work and regulate our nervous system to tell ourselves that we're now safe. You know, you go into a situation where it's high stress and it's high risk. And so everything in your body is pumping, you know, you've got that tunnel vision. And then you get back to your base and you're still stuck in that situation of high stress. So just to be able to regulate your body and say, I'm safe now, like we're all good. You can calm down a little bit. You know, neglecting that side of things, but also neglecting actually preparing people for what they're going to go into. And I had a very good conversation recently with a friend where they've said, you know, has anyone actually had that difficult conversation with their partner or with their family saying, this is a situation where I could get shot. The job that I'm in, I could potentially die. Yeah. And actually preparing yourself for that, because they don't teach you that in our academy. And I think that's because they're scared that if they do, they might lose staff.
Right. Well,
so yeah,
which is always interesting to me, because I'm someone who advocates for, because I teach at a local law enforcement academy, and I advocate for making the job so real in the beginning so that people who aren't in the right mindset for it decide to quit on day one. Like, I would rather they either not apply or quit on day one of the academy than come into the profession and then decide 9 months later, a year later, that it's not for them, or get washed out, or worse yet, actually make it through probation and then end up
Mm.
in a situation that either puts them in danger or their family, or, them or one of their partners in danger. So,
Yeah, I love that. That's what we should be doing here, but it's not happening. So the whole preparation phase of actually preparing people for what they're gonna experience or what they may experience is really important. And not that my situation I could have been prepared for it, but if I had an understanding of dysfunctional coping mechanisms, that drinking could be one of them, and or running away. If I had an understanding, then maybe I could have identified what I was doing rather than just continually doing it and blacking out, and until it got to a point where I've broken down at work and gone, this isn't me.
yeah, no, and your story is so powerful, and I love what you're doing now. Let me ask you, I just want to be clear for the listener out there that, and thank you so much for sharing your story. And obviously, it's centered around a sexual assault case, which is horrific that you went through that. But I want to be clear that some of what we're talking about when it comes to trauma, secondary trauma, and these coping mechanisms can be brought on just by the profession itself. Is that accurate in your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think of trauma a lot as everyone's got a cupboard in their kitchen that they fill with just containers, or so you just shove something in there, you close the cupboard and you hope that it stays shut and things don't come falling out. And a lot of the time that's what trauma is that you think you've dealt with something even though you haven't talked about it or debriefed or done what you needed to do, but because it's not flaring up immediately, you're like, I've dealt with it. But all you've done is put that container in that cupboard, right? And then there's only so many containers you can put in there. So you keep going to these traumatic events and you keep putting the containers in the cupboard, and all of a sudden you put one in, and it could be the smallest container. It could be something that you think is totally irrelevant, but you've put it in there, you've tried to close the cupboard, and then they've all just come pouring out.
Yeah. And it all comes back in that moment. These are universal truths. And that's what I hope the listeners are getting out of this. It doesn't matter what continent you're on. It doesn't matter where you work. If you're in law enforcement, these things apply to all of us in this career in one way or another. And it's funny as you tell it, well, not funny, haha, but funny, surreal, as you're telling these stories, that different incidents and stuff are coming to mind. And even was involved in a pretty crazy incident, and never really thought anything of it. I mean, there was some briefing. I'm very fortunate to be at an agency that's extremely forward thinking in the mental health space. So we have all sorts of peer support teams, and we have, at times I joke, it may be the opposite, as rather than nobody wanting to talk, they want you to talk so many people that's like, for the love of God, please leave me alone. But anyway, which isn't a bad thing, but seeing both sides of the equation, it's humorous. But I didn't even think anything of it until July 4th, a couple months later. It had been a shooting type incident. And then I was watching fireworks, which I love 4th of July fireworks in America. And it wasn't until the fireworks started going off that all of a sudden I started getting this physical response that took me back to that moment. And I realized, holy cow, that is actually, this thing is with me more than I realized. Like you said, all of a sudden that one little container, it's like, okay, this is something I haven't dealt with.
Yeah, and sometimes it doesn't come back for ages, and it is that one triggering moment that actually comes up, and you're like, okay, let's deal with this now.
Yes. The other thing that I really want to highlight before, and we're going to next quickly get into your what you're doing now and talk about your podcast, Breaking the Stigma. But you talk about organizations, and it's interesting. Just yesterday, I put out on social media a couple things in reference to mental health. And the amount of feedback that I get when I do that from people who are giving story after heartbreaking story of their organization, either failing them, walking away, firing them. I mean, it's crazy. And I don't know all the circumstances. And I'm not saying the organizations are always wrong, because I've got to be fair. Maybe this officer did do something. Speaking of their cases, that did lead to them losing their employment, that is legitimate. I don't know. I can't make that judgment call, but I can say that we have a problem as a profession when I'm getting that amount of feedback, and then I'm hearing these horror stories like what you're telling me.
Yeah, I think it's a big thing, because at the end, And I told this to our human resources officers, is when I left the job, I said, I want you to know that I'm not actually leaving because of the incident. I've healed from the incident and I've done what I needed to do. I'm leaving because the organization didn't treat me with respect and didn't treat me how they should be treating me. And I can't work for an organization like that.
Yeah, which is exactly the right thing to do. So let's talk about what you're doing now, because you're doing some great things. So you went through this, and then like the best of stories, you took this negative that could have become your story, and it's not. Instead, your story is what you're doing now. So walk us into kind of the next steps and what that led to.
Yeah. So it's actually funny. I want to touch on something just previous. So it would have been, maybe 9 months ago, my partner said to me, and this is in the midst of me going through the reporting, and it was coming to the end of it, but it was still very triggering for me. And my partner said, one day there will be a positive from this. And yes. I saw red. I was like, how is there a positive? There will not be a positive, and he was right. Maybe his timing in saying that was a little bit off.
Yeah, I understand that completely. I've had moments where people are like, someday you're going to look at this and this is going to be your success story. And I'm like, it's not how it feels right now. I hate you. But anyway, go on.
Yeah. So, in leaving, I have a lot of really close friends that are still police officers, and I love them to pieces, and seeing them slowly become cynical and jaded is just, it's not something that I want to see. And so from my own incident, you reach out to people that have been through the same thing, or you hear that have been through the same thing, and you start making these connections, and you hear that, unfortunately, you're not the only one that's been through it. And so you start creating these connections. And then once I actually left the police force, I had a whole lot more people reach out to me saying, hey, we're really proud of you. You're doing something really good. I'm actually going through something at the moment, and I plan on leaving. So off the back of that, I was like, wow, we really have a problem with people not talking about mental health. And whether that be, something like what I went through, or whether that just be an incident that you went to at work. But no one is talking about how they feel. And I think part of that is, as police officers, and I don't know whether you'll be able to resonate, is that we have to show strength. We go to these jobs and you're the one that people turn to. So we have to show this strength. But I think in that moment is also, our strength is our biggest weakness. Yeah. And to our own detriment, I then think that we feel like we can't express when we are feeling like weak and vulnerable and we need help, because we're supposed to be that person that you turn to when you need help.
Yep.
So that's kind of where it all started, where I had people reaching out to me and saying, I had this problem and I couldn't talk to people. And it's like, oh man, I wish that stigma, like breaking the stigma, like my podcast, I wish that stigma would just be broken, because, if you had that person to talk to, this might be a different outcome. Maybe I could still be in the police force in a job. I loved the job. I didn't leave because of the job. So that's where that's come from. And the passion of, I want to be able to educate not only my friends that I still have in the job, but, their friends and then their friends, and, the flow on effect of like, this is how shift work can affect you. So, regulating your nervous system, the circadian rhythm, your work-life balance, this is how it could affect you. This is what you might see, and this is what you can prepare for. And then hopefully, they've got some sort of longevity in the job where they can stay in a job that they love, because they've got this balance of everything and they have this understanding, and then they can talk to people and be weak and be vulnerable with the people that they love.
I absolutely love it. And that is so needed. Unfortunately, I'm starting to see more and more of it begin, but you are right. We are so far away from where we need to be. And it's funny that word vulnerable has come up in the last 4 podcasts that I've recorded. So yeah, by the time they hear this, they will have heard that word 4 times now. It literally is becoming like the theme of this podcast for some reason, but it's so true. And I love what you said. And you had prefaced it by saying, I don't know if this will resonate with you. It absolutely does, because law enforcement, besides a lot of times having type A personalities, it also tends to lend people who want to solve people's problems. That's legitimately, you sit on the oral board, and what we call it, the hiring process, there's usually a oral board where they come and sit before you. You always ask them, why do you want to get in law enforcement? And they always say, well, I want to help people. So it almost becomes laughable because that's what everybody says. But the reality is there is some part of that as to what draws people to law enforcement of any type. It's the service aspect of it. And you are so correct that I think that that becomes the driving forces to why we're doing what we're doing. And we never stop to think about, well, maybe I need help, or maybe I need to. And then there's a stigma attached to that. So you are absolutely correct. So you also do, so you have the podcast. I want to make sure everybody checks it out. Breaking the Stigma, First Responders, and Mental Health. Did I say that correctly?
You did, yes.
Okay. Yeah. And then you also have coaching through JFP Wellness. Is that also accurate?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. So I do have a website, but most of it's run through my own Instagram. So that's just Jasmin, or at jasmin.f.peach. So yeah, that's just for, I'd love to work with new recruits, because I think that prevention is key, rather than trying to deal with someone once they've got the trauma, and we obviously need that help. But I think if we can start to shift our focus to actually prevention, so giving the recruits these tools that they need with, mindfulness, understanding shift work, understanding the circadian rhythm, what you should be eating, nutrition. If you can give them those tools, then we may not actually end up in the situation of trauma or PTSD or whatever, that might be or might look like. So yeah, just really, that's where I want to go, is working with recruits. But at the moment, it's just coaching for anyone that wants it. But
and
ideally,
is that anywhere in the world? Is that online, I'm assuming? So you can coach with anyone. It doesn't matter what country they're in.
Yes, correct. Anyone in the world. So thank you, Zoom. We love Zoom and online stuff. And, that became really big during COVID, is, you can move everything online, which is awesome. So yeah, it's really fun. Just educating people, because, I have now all this knowledge that I don't want to gatekeep. I don't want to stop people from knowing these things, because if it was someone in my position, I would still love to be in that job. And so I want to find those people and help them still be in that job.
That's an awesome mission. I absolutely love it. Let me just clarify a couple things. So the JFP Wellness, that's not associated, and I know this is a rhetorical question, but it's not associated with any agency or anything.
No.
And the reason I'm saying that is one of the biggest concerns whenever I mention, or anyone mentions, mental health to law enforcement officers, is they are afraid to reach out and to have a coach or to talk to somebody, because they're afraid of what kind of impact that might have on their career. So reaching out to your wellness coaching, we can assure them that that's not going to affect their career at all. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. No links. It's funny you bring that up, because I've had a lot of conversations with people in the police force who have said, I don't want to get help because I may get my gun taken away from me.
Yep. Hear it all the time.
And then they lose their support network. It's not just, their equipment. I'm sure they don't actually have that emotional connection to their gun, where they're, whatever it might be. It's, it's that support network that you go to work and you have your friends. So if you don't have your gun, you can't go to work.
Well, and there is a lot of, and I don't know in other countries, but in America, I mean, there is definitely a tie to your badge and your gun, and you kind of feel naked without them over time. I mean, you can be a detective and that's all you literally have is the badge and the gun, and that, that is everything. And when you have that taken away from you, you feel like your whole world is caving in, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is next for your mission? Anything else you want to tell the listeners on what else is coming up?
My podcast. So I've been really heavily focused on that, getting a lot of people on there. The most recent person I had on there, he is an inspiration. So his name's Derek McManus. He's from South Australia, and in 1994 he was part of South Australia's Special Task and Rescue. So I don't know, I think SWAT might be the equivalent.
Okay.
Maybe.
Probably. Special weapons and tactics, yes.
Yes, yeah. So they go to all of our high risk stuff, incidences, So he went to a job where, and this is when, you know, our gun laws are very different to America, but guns were allowed in Australia pretty much. So went to this job and he got shot at 18 times, got hit 14 times in the space of 5 seconds, because this guy was using a Chinese military assault rifle and actually hit an artery. So, you know, this man, he should have bled out. And he didn't, because he actually, you know, 1994, he's very old school, but he said, you know, he had prepared and done, you know, all the things with his family, saying, if I get shot, this might happen. So he just a massive inspiration. So I just, you know, I want to spread the word that it's, you know, it's not only him, because that didn't traumatize him. That incident didn't cause any trauma. The trauma came from actually him and his wife divorcing. Because that wasn't planned. So just making it well known that just because something is supposed to be traumatic doesn't mean it is, but just because something isn't supposed to be traumatic doesn't mean it isn't as well. So just reaching out for no matter what incident and talking about it, like breaking that stigma, just talking about anything. Don't be scared. I think that's my main thing, is like, just talk to anyone. And if they judge you, then like get rid of them. You know, we don't want those people.
I agree with you 100%. And I had the fortune to be able to listen to that podcast, and that his story is incredible. So definitely, I suggest all the listeners check that out. Breaking the Stigma podcast. I can't let you go until I ask you my final question that I ask all the guests. We've kind of touched on this already. However, I like to ask it as a final summary question. So what is the one takeaway, the one thing that law enforcement officers can do that it's going to make a difference in their personal lives? Something actionable that they can do today that'll make a difference in their personal life.
Oh, okay. One of my biggest things is, and it should be actionable today, is make sure you have your outside of work connections. So, you know, we get very much caught in a bubble of law enforcement and having our friends. But one thing that I found massive was at work, I would talk to my friends and I'd be like, oh, you know, this guy ran at me with a knife and ha, ha, ha. And everyone's, you know, oh, that's so cool, you know, and you look at your body worn footage that you've got and, you know, it looks cool. And then I'd go home to my partner who's not in the job and I'd say, oh, you know, this guy ran at me with a knife, ha, ha, ha. And he's like, babe, you need to just like talk to me about it, because that's not normal and your body's probably needs to regulate it and you probably need to talk about it a bit more. And having that normal person, I guess, as we call it, who doesn't see what we see on a day-to-day basis is so important, because they bring you back down to earth and they are the people that are like, all right, you know, maybe you are really struggling, or maybe we just need to touch on this a bit more.
I love it. That is absolutely great advice. It's funny. We can be literally half a world away. And I agree with everything you're saying. It's very powerful. So Jasmin, I appreciate it. I want everyone to be sure to check out the Breaking the Stigma podcast. I will have that linked up in the show notes, as well as her Instagram, her Facebook, her Snapchat, all the things. I'll have all the things. Yes. You can just go in there, click on them, and definitely connect with Jasmin. It has been an absolute blessing. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a privilege to get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hopefully everyone can understand my accent.
I'm sure they can. And for just serendipitous programming, we're actually going to have 2 Australians back to back. So last week I just talked to an Australian, so you are the second one. So thank you, Jasmin. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. And that does it for this week's The Interview Room. I hope you really enjoyed it. Another great guest will be with us again next week. We have a great lineup for you here over the next few weeks and on through the rest of the year. So you're definitely not going to want to miss a single episode. We also have Morning Roll Call, which typically comes out on Monday mornings. However, I may change my mind, and who knows? It could come out a different day of the week. But Morning Roll Call, check that out as well. That's just me talking to you, and it gives us a few minutes to go over something, anything from news or something actionable that matters, hopefully, to you. One last favor, please, whatever service you are looking at or whatever service you are watching this on, you're listening to this on, please leave us a rating and review. 5 stars, that would be the appropriate number of stars. If for some reason it's not 5 stars in your opinion, or if it is, tell us why. We would love to hear it. I would love to get your feedback. In fact, I'm going to start reading some of these reviews on the air. I've been looking at some of the ones on Apple Podcast, and thank you for the phenomenal reviews. And thank you all for taking the time to listen to this. I hope you're really enjoying it. You all have a safe week out there, and I will see you next week in the interview room. I will see you next week in Morning Roll Call, but in the meantime, I'll see you on the blue line.